The wind over the McAllister Ranch had always sounded like a warning, rising through the cottonwoods with a restless whisper, but that night it felt like a living thing. It tugged at Clara McAllister's nightdress, chilled her skin, and carried her uneven breaths into the dark as she fled across the open yard. Moonlight washed the world in pale silver, revealing everything she had ever known her father's ranch house, the barn, the corrals, and yet none of it felt like home anymore. It felt like a cage. Clara ran barefoot, her feet striking the cold packed dirt, her lungs burning as she sprinted toward the fence line. Behind her, a lantern flickered inside the house, her father's room. She prayed he wouldn't notice her absence yet. She prayed the creaking floorboards wouldn't give her away. She prayed, most of all, that she would never again hear the sound of his footsteps stopping outside her bedroom door. It had started months ago, without warning. Clara would be lying in bed, half asleep, when she'd hear the soft click of her door opening. Her father, Samuel McAllister, once a strong rancher respected across the county, would stand in the doorway, unmoving. The first night, she thought he was checking on her after a nightmare. The second night, she tried to ask what was wrong, but he only stared at her with hollow, grief-stricken eyes she did not recognize. And by the third night, she knew something inside him had broken. Her mother had died 2 winters earlier, her light snuffed out by fever. Clara had mourned her deeply, but her father had been shattered into pieces no doctor, preacher, or friend could mend. For months he spoke to no one, worked the ranch with a kind of numb routine, and kept his grief shuttered behind hard, empty eyes. But then, suddenly, he had begun coming to Clara's room at night. He never touched her, never raised his voice, never crossed the threshold. Yet the way he stood there silent, staring, breathing her name under his breath as though she were someone else, turned her blood to ice. Mary. He whispered once, her mother's name. Clara had lain frozen beneath her quilt, unable to speak, unable to swallow, hardly able to breathe. When she finally gathered the courage to tell him she was Clara, not her mother, he had pressed his palm to the doorframe and whispered, "You always look so much like her." Each night afterward, the visits grew longer, more desperate, more frightening. Sometimes she woke to hear him crying in the hallway. Sometimes he whispered apologies to her mother's ghost, as though pleading for forgiveness from beyond the grave. And sometimes, those were the worst nights, he stood so long and so still that Clara felt as though he were waiting for something she did not want to know. The town doctor said her father was grieving. The preacher said he was praying for clarity. Clara knew he was slipping, sinking into a darkness even she could not reach. And when he started saying things like, "I lost you once, Mary. I won't lose you again," she realized her life was no longer hers. She had become a shadow of her mother in his grief-clouded mind. That night, the night she finally ran, he had opened her door again. She pretended to sleep, her body rigid under the blankets. When she felt his gaze on her, hot and lingering, she swallowed back tears. He whispered something she couldn't bear to hear, his voice hoarse and trembling. "You came back to me." Clara waited until he walked away. Waited until she heard the creak of his floorboards. Waited until the lantern glow retreated to his room. And then she slipped out of bed, grabbed nothing but a blanket and her mother's small silver cross, and pushed her window open. Cold air slapped her face as she scrambled outside. She didn't stop to saddle a horse, didn't dare risk the noise. She ran toward the open desert, the one place her father never ventured after dark. With every step, fear urged her forward. The ranch house shrank behind her, swallowed by the shadows of the mesas. The land stretched empty and wild before her, a dangerous place for a girl alone, yet safer than the home she fled. Clara did not know where she was going, only that she could never return. And somewhere beyond the hills, an Apache warrior would soon find her broken, exhausted, and desperate for the truth to be heard. The desert did not care who lived or died. By sunrise, Clara understood that plainly. Her legs ached with every step. Her throat felt carved from sandpaper. She had wrapped her thin blanket around her shoulders, but the night chill had already stolen most of her warmth, leaving her shivering as she moved deeper into Apache territory, land every settler child was warned never to enter. But fear of the unknown was nothing compared to the fear she carried from home. By mid-morning, she reached the dry riverbed. Her breath hitched. She looked around wildly, half expecting horsemen from her father's ranch to come barreling over the ridge. She slid down the bank, her feet slipping in loose gravel, and stumbled to the bottom where a thin ribbon of muddy water clung to the earth. She scooped it up with shaking hands, drinking desperately, even though it tasted of dust and copper. The world swayed around her. She pressed her forehead to her knees, trying to calm her racing heart. That was when she heard it. Hoofbeats. Slow, deliberate, coming closer. Clara froze. The sun beat hard on her back as she lifted her head. 4 silhouettes appeared at the top of the riverbank, their horses standing tall against the rising light. Her breath caught. Apache. Every story she'd heard since childhood rushed through her mind. Raids, kidnappings, warriors who took what they wanted. But these men did not look wild or reckless. They sat their horses with quiet authority, their gazes steady. Unreadable. One of them dismounted. He was taller than the others. Shoulders broad beneath a vest of tanned hide, hair braided with a strip of red cloth. His presence felt like a shadow stretching across the desert, calm, controlled, dangerous. Clara stumbled back until her spine hit the dry river wall. "Please," she whispered, raising her palms in surrender. "I'm not here to harm anyone." The warrior approached slowly, as though she might bolt like a frightened colt. His eyes were dark, intense, assessing every tremble in her fingers. He spoke to the others in Apache. Their voices were low, controlled, nothing like the war cry settlers warned about. The tall warrior knelt beside her. Clara flinched. He didn't touch her. Instead, he tipped his head, studying her like a puzzle. "You are hurt," he said at last. His English was deep and accented, but clear. Clara swallowed hard. I'm fine." Her voice broke on the last word. Her lips were cracked. Her feet were bleeding. She looked anything but fine. The warrior's gaze softened slightly. "Water," he said, lifting a small skin flask. Clara hesitated. Accepting anything felt like surrender, but her body screamed for relief. She took the flask with trembling fingers. The water inside was cool, fresh, better than anything she'd tasted in hours. She drank until he raised a hand for her to stop. "Slow," he murmured. "Too fast will hurt." She wiped her mouth, staring at him. "Why are you helping me?" The warrior did not answer immediately. His gaze flicked to her bare feet, her nightdress torn at the hem, her swollen eyes. Finally, he said, "A woman alone in the desert is not here by choice." Her breath hitched. Her throat tightened. He had seen through her. Another Apache warrior approached the tall one, speaking urgently. Clara caught only one word: settlers. Her stomach dropped. Had they seen riders behind her? Was her father already searching? The tall warrior's jaw tightened. He turned back to her, lowering himself so their eyes were level. "What is your name?" "Clara," she whispered. "I am Coda." The name suited him, strong, steady. The kind of name the wind would respect. Coda gestured toward his horse. "You come with us." "No," Clara breathed, shaking her head. "I can't, I'm not. You will die here," he said simply. "Sun is too strong." And men might follow. Her pulse thudded painfully. She knew he was right. Every direction she saw was empty land, unforgiving and vast. She had no horse, no food, no chance of surviving alone. Koda extended his hand, not forcing, not commanding. Offering got Clara hesitated only a moment before placing her hand in his. His grip was firm but careful. As though she were something fragile he didn't want to break. He lifted her onto his horse, mounted behind her, and gave a low signal to his men. They rode toward the heart of Apache territory. Clara's fear did not disappear, but for the first time since fleeing her father's house, she felt something unexpected, something she hadn't felt in years. Safety. The Apache village lay tucked between two red cliffs, hidden from the world like a secret kept by the desert itself. Clara clung to Koda's vest as the horse carried her through the winding path toward it, her fingers trembling but her body too exhausted to hold itself upright without him. Every breath of wind carried the scent of smoke, pine resin, and earth strange, unfamiliar, yet somehow more comforting than anything she had breathed in months. As they entered the camp, dozens of eyes lifted to her. Women paused in their weaving, children abandoned their game of tossing stones, and elders raised their faces from the fires. Clara's heart stuttered. She shrank back instinctively, expecting judgment, fear, maybe even anger. Settler children grew up hearing tales that Apache villages were dangerous places, full of warriors who distrusted outsiders, but the faces staring at her were not filled with hatred. They were filled with curiosity. A bay group of children approached first, barefoot and fearless, their dark eyes shining with wonder. One little girl reached out a hand and gently touched Clara's torn nightdress as though examining a wounded bird. Clara swallowed a sob she hadn't realized was rising. Koda dismounted and lifted her down from the horse with a strength softened by caution. She expected him to let her fall the moment her feet touched the ground, but he kept a steadying hand on her back, guiding her forward, not pushing, simply supporting. An older woman approached them, her hair streaked with silver, her gaze sharp as flint and warm as fire. She spoke with Koda briefly in Apache, glancing at Clara with a mixture of compassion and assessment. "This is Nalin," Koda told her softly. "She is a healer." Clara nodded, though her mind was spinning. She couldn't imagine how she must look to them, half frozen, bruised from running, barefoot, dressed in nothing but a thin cotton nightgown that clung to her like a whisper of shame. She wrapped the blanket tighter around herself. Nalin took Clara's hands gently. Her palms were calloused, her touch firm but motherly. Without a word, she led Clara toward a small lodge on the edge of the village. Koda followed a few steps behind, watching her as though he expected her to collapse any moment. Inside the lodge, sunlight filtered through smoke holes and soft ribbons. The air carried the smell of sage and warm cedar. Clara sank onto a woven mat as Nalin set a bowl of water beside her. The healer's fingers traced the swelling on Clara's feet, the cracked skin on her lips, the bruises forming where she had stumbled over rocks in the dark. "She will be well," Koda asked quietly in Apache. Clara didn't need to understand the words. She heard the concern beneath them. Nalin nodded. She cleaned Clara's wounds with warm water scented with herbs, wrapped her feet in strips of soft deerskin, and placed a small clay cup of thick broth beside her. Clara raised it hesitantly to her lips. The flavor, rich, smoky, and comforting, filled her chest with warmth she hadn't felt in a long time. Overwhelmed, she began to shake. Koda crouched beside her, his voice calm, the way one might soothe a frightened animal. "You are safe here." Safe. The word felt foreign, almost impossible. Clara stared at the ground, tears hitting the mat one by one. Embarrassment burned her cheeks. She didn't want to cry in front of him. She didn't want to look weak, but the tears kept coming. Every night she had woken in terror. Every day she had tried to pretend nothing was wrong. Every moment she had carried a fear so heavy it hollowed her from the inside. Now, in this quiet lodge with strangers who treated her with more kindness than she had known in years, the dam finally cracked. Coda did not touch her. He simply stayed beside her, silent and steady, letting her cry until her breath no longer trembled. When the tears finally slowed, Clara whispered, "I'm sorry." "For what?" he asked. "For being like this." His expression softened. A wounded deer does not apologize for bleeding. She stared at him, startled by the gentleness in his voice. Outside, the sounds of village life resumed: women grinding corn, children laughing, warriors sharpening arrows. The world moved on, as though her arrival was nothing more shocking than a leaf blown in by the wind. Yet for Clara, sitting wrapped in a warm blanket with her feet cleaned and bandaged, everything had changed. For the first time in months, maybe years, she felt something she barely recognized. She felt the edges of hope. The desert sun dipped low behind the jagged mesas, painting the village in long, amber shadows. Clara sat beside the fire, the warmth brushing against her chilled skin, but it could not chase away the knot of dread that had grown in her chest. Every night since arriving, she had woken screaming from nightmares she could barely explain, and every night Coda had been there, silent and watchful, ensuring no harm came to her. Yet despite the safety, despite the comfort of the Apache village, the truth clawed at her like a caged animal desperate for freedom. Finally, she could not hold it in any longer. She looked at Coda, his dark eyes reflecting the flames, steady and unflinching, and swallowed her fear. "I have to tell you something," she whispered, her voice trembling. He nodded, encouraging her without words. Clara's hands shook as she wrapped them around her knees. It's my father," she began, her voice almost breaking under the weight of her memories. He comes into my room every night." Coda's brow creased slightly, though his posture remained calm. He had faced warriors, outlaws, storms, and death itself, but the fear in Clara's eyes was unlike anything he had ever encountered. It was pure terror, a living thing that had consumed her for months. He doesn't touch me," she said quickly, as though anticipating his judgment. "But he whispers to someone or something. I think he's talking to my mother. He says things I can't even understand. And he looks at me like I'm her, like I'm her." Her words fell into the silence of the evening, heavy and raw. The only sound was the crackle of the fire and the distant cry of a coyote echoing through the mesas. Clara buried her face in her knees, her body trembling. She had run from her father's house for this moment, hoping, praying, that Coda might understand, but the words themselves felt like a betrayal of some sacred boundary she could not name. Coda's gaze did not waver. His jaw tightened slightly and his eyes darkened. He knew grief could twist a man's mind, but this was beyond grief. He recognized it for what it truly was: madness born of loss and obsession. The father she feared was not a man who sought to harm her physically, yet the danger was no less real. Fear, after all, was a weapon, and her father wielded it nightly in a way that had hollowed out Clara's spirit. "You have done well to run," Coda said finally, his voice low and calm, carrying both reassurance and authority. "No one should live in fear in their own home. What your father does, it is not your burden to carry alone." Clara lifted her head, her tear-stained face illuminated by the firelight. I thought I was going mad too. I thought maybe I was imagining it. But every night he comes. I hear him whispering my mother's name, and he calls me hers. He says he lost her once and will never lose her again. And her voice cracked. I don't know how to make him stop. The confession hung in the air, raw and terrifying. Coda's mind raced. In the Apache way, the dead belonged to the Great Spirit, to rest in peace. Disturbing them, calling on their presence through the living, was a danger that went beyond superstition. Her father's actions, however unintended, violated that sacred boundary. And Clara, she had suffered enough. "You are safe here," Coda said again, placing a steady hand on hers. "We will not let him take you back. You are free to choose your path. No one may force you to return to a place that has brought you fear." Clara felt the weight of the confession lifting slightly, replaced by a fragile sense of trust. For the first time in months, she truly believed that someone understood her and that someone would protect her. The fear that had defined her nights began to loosen its grip, though not entirely. There were still battles ahead, dangers outside the camp, and the shadow of her father's obsession lingering in the distance. But here, beside Coda, beneath the vast, endless sky of the desert, Clara allowed herself a small, trembling sigh. She had spoken the truth aloud, and in doing so, she had taken the first step toward reclaiming her life. The Apache warrior who had once seemed like a shadow at the edge of the desert now felt like a shield, steady and unwavering. He had listened, without judgment, without hesitation. And though the journey ahead was uncertain, Clara knew she would not face it alone. The desert air was thick with tension as the Apache scout signaled from the ridge. Clara had been tending the small garden near the village's edge, her hands busy with soil and herbs when Coda's alert came. He had seen them first a distant cloud of dust rising over the mesas, riding fast and heavy, too deliberate to be ordinary travelers. Her father was coming, and he had brought company. Clara froze. Her heart hammered against her ribs, threatening to escape. The image of her father's twisted obsession, the way he had called her by her mother's name, whispered through the nights, never touching yet dominating every corner of her life, flashed through her mind. And now he was coming for her. Not alone, but with 6 armed ranch hands. She had fled to find freedom, and freedom now hung by a thread. Coda placed a firm hand on her shoulder, grounding her. His eyes scanned the horizon, calculating, measuring. Distance, reading the land like an extension of himself. "They have come for you," he said calmly, though the edge of steel in his voice betrayed the danger. "But they will not take you while I breathe." Clara swallowed hard. He will never stop. He'll come with guns or with knives. He'll bring the men from the ranch. He'll take me by force if he must. I can't go back." "You will not go back," Coda replied. There was no question in his voice, only the certainty of action. "We will face them." The dust cloud grew closer, and soon she could make out the familiar outline of her father older than she remembered. Shoulders hunched, hat pulled low, eyes burning with a mix of fear and madness. His mouth moved, shouting her name. The ranch hands flanked him, rifles slung across their chests, their expressions wary but obedient. They had heard the old man's stories about Clara being possessed by her mother's spirit, and they were afraid to disobey. Clara's stomach twisted. She could not believe she had spent her childhood under his roof, sheltered by the illusion of safety, only to discover the darkness that had grown behind it. And now, seeing him ride closer, she understood just how far gone he had become. His grief had festered into something dangerous, something that had no place in the world of the living. Coda mounted his horse, his black hair braided tightly against the wind, eyes cold and focused. The Apache warriors assembled behind him like shadows ready to strike. Their horses shifted nervously, hoofs stamping the ground, ears flicking toward the approaching riders. Clara felt a strange surge of calm. Her heart still pounded, but she knew they were not alone. She was not defenseless. Her father's voice carried across the canyon, ragged and desperate. "Clara, you are mine. You will return with me. You will be my wife, my Mary reborn." Clara flinched at the words. Her father's delusion had crossed every boundary, but now he sought to claim her openly, with the law of the gun backing him. She felt her knees weaken, fear threatening to paralyze her, but Koda's presence beside her steadied her. "You are not hers," Koda called back, his voice echoing across the desert. "You are your own. You will not return to a place of fear." The ranch hands hesitated. They had expected compliance, maybe tears, maybe a timid girl who would follow her father like a shadow. Instead, they found a warrior standing tall, unwavering, and behind him, a village prepared to defend its own. Something shifted in their minds, a sliver of doubt, a taste of fear. Her father's eyes narrowed, the madness burning brighter. He raised his rifle, shouting, "She is mine! She is Mary reborn, and she will obey me." The weapon trembled. In his hands, unsteady as the weight of obsession clashed with reality. Clara's stomach tightened. She knew the coming confrontation could be deadly. She looked at Koda, ready to face whatever came, trusting him with her life in a way she had never trusted anyone. And in that moment, a strange courage stirred inside her, an ember she thought had long been extinguished. She would not run again. Not tonight. Not ever. The canyon held its breath, the wind silent, the dust frozen in midair. As father and warrior prepared to meet, each a reflection of desperation and determination, each claiming the same girl in vastly different ways. The night was coming, and with it, a reckoning that would determine not only Clara's fate, but her freedom. The sun had barely risen when Koda led Clara and the Apache warriors to the edge of Red Canyon. The rugged cliffs cast long shadows across the dry riverbed below, turning the world into a landscape of fire and stone. Down below, Clara's father and his 6 men had stopped, horses skittish, rifles at the ready, eyes wild with desperation. The air was heavy, almost trembling with anticipation, and the wind seemed to carry the scent of powder and sweat. Koda's gaze swept the canyon with the calm precision of a hunter. His hands rested lightly on his bow, though it was clear to anyone who looked that he was ready for much more than arrows. Behind him, the Apache warriors crouched, hidden behind the rocks, silent and tense, each knowing the stakes of this encounter. Clara's heart pounded in her chest, not out of fear of the desert, but because she understood the recklessness that had brought her father to this place. Her father's voice shattered the morning stillness. "Clara, come back. You are mine. Your mother's spirit lives in you. I will not lose you again." Clara trembled, the sound of his words cutting through her like a whip. She had run from this for months, years, but now she could not hide. Koda placed a steady hand on her shoulder. "Stay behind me," he said softly, his voice firm and unyielding. Her father lifted his rifle, shaking, eyes wild and haunted. The ranch hands mirrored him, unsure whether to follow or flee, uncertainty etched across their faces. Koda stepped forward, the sun glinting off the dark braid that hung over his shoulder, his presence commanding and unflinching. "You will not take her," Koda called, voice echoing across the canyon, calm but sharp, carrying the weight of authority. "She is not yours to command, nor yours to claim. She is a living woman with her own life. Step back." For a moment, the world seemed to pause. The wind stopped. The dust hung motionless in the air, and even the birds seemed to hold their breath. Clara's father's face twisted further, a mixture of grief, obsession, and fury. "She is mine," he shouted. "She is Mary returned. You will not keep her from me." Koda's eyes narrowed. He could see the madness in the old man's gaze, the way grief had twisted him into something unrecognizable. He also saw the hesitation in the ranch hands' faces, the cracks in their loyalty. They were men of fear, not courage. One wrong move, and this could end in blood. "You are lost in your own grief," Koda said, stepping closer, arms loose but ready. "Do not endanger her or yourself further. Let her choose her own life. You have no claim here." Clara's father raised his rifle, hands trembling. His finger brushed the trigger, but he faltered, torn between obsession and the instinct of survival. Koda's hand did not waver, nor did his posture falter. The Apache warriors, hidden in the rocks, flexed their fingers around bows and tomahawks, ready to act if one wrong move came from the men below. Clara, standing behind Koda, felt a mixture of fear and awe. The man who had saved her from the desert, who had listened to her terror and sheltered her in ways no one ever had, now faced her father without hesitation. She felt the weight of history, of every night spent under her father's shadow, pressing against this moment. Finally, her father's hands began to shake violently. The rifle wavered. The obsession in his eyes battled against reason. He let out a strangled cry, the kind of sound that comes from a man realizing his own madness. The ranch hands looked at him, fear overtaking loyalty. Their rifles wavered. The canyon held its breath. The standoff had reached its breaking point. Every second stretched into an eternity. Clara's freedom, her life, rested on the edge of a precipice, her father's desperation against the steady resolve of Koda and his people. At last, the tension snapped. Koda's calm, commanding presence, paired with the silent strength of his warriors, left no room for doubt. One arrow thudded into the earth near the old man's feet, a warning. Clara's father fell to his knees, sobbing, and the ranch hands, shaken and uncertain, began to lower their rifles. The standoff had ended, but the canyon remembered it. Every rock, every gust of wind, every shadow seemed to hold the echo of fear and defiance, of control wrested from obsession, of a young woman's life finally being claimed by choice rather than coercion. Clara exhaled a shaky breath. She looked at Koda, her protector, and realized she had survived more than just the desert. She had survived her father's madness, and the dawn promised a new life, one she could finally call her own. The morning sun glared down on Red Canyon like a blazing judge, casting long shadows across the dust-strewn riverbed. Clara's heart thudded violently in her chest as her father, still on his knees, raised a shaking hand toward the sky. His voice, hoarse and broken, carried across the canyon. "She is mine. She is Mary reborn. You cannot take her from me." The words made Clara flinch. Months of terror, nights of whispered obsessions, and the weight of his madness pressed against her chest like a boulder. She had fled him once, but this was the moment she realized that escape alone would never have been enough. Freedom required courage, and Koda had shown her what that meant. Koda's gaze was as steady as the cliffs surrounding them. Behind him, his warriors shifted silently, ready, their bows drawn, arrows nocked with deadly precision. Every muscle in his body radiated control, calm, and confidence. Clara, standing beside him, felt an unusual warmth of safety, a shield that stretched wider than just his arms. Her father raised his rifle, trembling violently, the weapon unsteady in his hands. The ranch hands fidgeted behind him, unease written across their faces. No one had ever confronted him like this before. No one had dared to call his obsession by its true name. Koda's voice cut through the tense silence. "Stop. Put the weapon down. She is not yours to claim. You are lost in your grief. Let her live her life." For a heartbeat, it seemed her father might comply. His hands shook, the rifle wobbling as if the weight of his own madness had become unbearable. Then, a single desperate decision, he fired. The bullet whistled past Koda, striking a rock with a deafening crack and sending shards of stone scattering. Clara gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. Her father's face twisted with panic, realization dawning too late that his obsession had nearly ended in bloodshed. Single arrow arced through the air from one of Koda's hidden warriors, striking the ground mere inches from the old man's boots. The message was clear. No harm would come to Clara while the Apache were present, and any further act of violence would be met instantly and decisively. The ranch hands faltered, looking at each other uncertainly. Fear had taken root in their eyes. Their loyalty to a man whose mind had unraveled could not withstand the unyielding presence of Coda and his warriors. One by one, their rifles lowered. Clara's father sank to the ground completely, sobs racking his body. "Mary, I lost her. I cannot lose her again." His words trailed off into quiet, broken sobs as he buried his face in the dust. Clara felt a strange mix of pity and relief. The man who had terrified her, haunted her dreams, and dominated her nights with obsession was no longer a threat. He had collapsed under the weight of his own grief, stripped of his control by the quiet authority of Coda. She stepped forward slowly, her bare feet brushing the dust, and looked at her father. "It's over," she whispered. "I am not your mother. I am me, and I will not live in fear any more." The old man lifted his face, tear-streaked and hollow. For the first time, he saw her not as Mary returned, not as the woman he had obsessed over, but as Clara. The realization hit him with the force of years lost and the futility of trying to grasp something that had long slipped through his fingers. Coda extended a hand to her, steady, unwavering. "Come," he said. "Your life is yours now." Clara hesitated only a moment before placing her hand in his. It was a simple gesture, yet it carried the weight of all the nights she had suffered, all the fear she had endured, and all the hope she had barely dared to dream of. The canyon seemed to exhale as she followed him back toward the village. Her father remained on the ground, sobbing quietly while his men scattered, leaving behind the dust of failure and the echoes of obsession. The confrontation had ended, and Clara's freedom had been claimed not by flight, not by luck, but by courage, loyalty, and the strength of a man who saw her as she truly was. For the first time in her life, Clara felt that the night might finally be hers, not one filled with fear, but one filled with the possibility of safety, peace, and perhaps even something more. The desert air was softer that evening, carrying the scent of sage and earth, the smell of warmth and life instead of fear. Clara walked slowly through the Apache village, her bare feet brushing the smooth dirt, the sun dipping low behind the mesas. She no longer flinched at the shadows. She no longer flinched at the wind. The terror that had haunted her nights was gone, replaced by a fragile, steady sense of peace, a feeling she had thought lost forever. Coda rode beside her, quiet, steady, his presence a shield as tangible as the cliffs themselves. The Apache people moved around them with familiarity and ease, the children laughing, the elders working, the women carrying firewood and herbs. Clara's heart swelled at the sight. For the first time, she felt part of a world that nurtured her instead of threatening her. She paused by a small garden, the same spot where Coda had first alerted her to her father's approach. She knelt, touching the soil, feeling the life pulse beneath her fingers. Here, she could grow not just plants, but herself, her courage, her freedom. She could finally breathe. Coda dismounted, brushing dust from his legs, and came to stand beside her. His dark eyes caught hers, holding them with a quiet intensity that made her chest flutter. "You are safe here," he said. "No one will harm you. Not now, not ever." Clara nodded, a small trembling smile lifting her lips. I believe you," she whispered. "I never thought I would feel safe again." "You will," Coda replied. "This is your home. And this," he gestured to the village, to the people who had welcomed her, "is your family." Clara looked around, seeing faces she had come to trust, to love. The children waved shyly at her, some holding small gifts of carved wood or painted stones. The elders nodded in respect, their eyes filled with quiet acknowledgement. And through it all, Coda's steady presence reminded her that she had a protector, not a captor. Not a jailer, but someone who would walk beside her, shoulder to shoulder, through life's harsh deserts and soft dawns alike. As night fell, the sky painted itself in brilliant streaks of orange, purple, and deep indigo, stars appearing one by one like scattered diamonds. Clara and Coda stood together on a small rise overlooking the village. She felt the warmth of him beside her, the strength of him grounding her, and for the first time she felt desire and trust mingle with the sense of safety. "Will you stay with me?" she asked softly, almost afraid to voice the question. Coda's eyes softened, the hard edges of the warrior melting into something tender. "I will stay," he said simply, "as long as you want. You will never be watched in fear again, Clara, only in love." Her lips curved into a genuine smile. The words settled over her like a blessing, and for the first time, Clara allowed herself to imagine a life without terror. A life shaped by choice and affection rather than oppression and obsession. In the days that followed, she learned the language, the songs, the stories, and the ways of the Apache people. She ran with the children across the mesas, helped with the gardens, and joined in the evening gatherings around the fire. And always Coda was there, guiding, protecting, and silently teaching her how to trust again, not only him, but herself. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the mountains, Clara sat with Coda under the vast, star-filled sky. The desert stretched before them, vast, wild, and free. She leaned her head against his shoulder, feeling the strength of him and the warmth of a life reclaimed. She no longer feared the night. She no longer feared her father. She had survived the desert, the obsession, and the darkness. And in the quiet companionship of the Apache village, she had found something she had never known before: a home, a family, and the beginnings of a new heart, brave enough to love and to be loved. Clara closed her eyes, letting the wind carry away the last traces of fear. The night belonged to her now, filled not with terror, but with possibility, freedom, and the steady, unwavering presence of the man who had saved her. Coda pressed a gentle hand over hers, and together they watched the stars, knowing that the story of her past had ended and a new story full of hope and courage had just begun.